Hello and welcome to episode 102 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Tarek.
I'm Marco, and thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. We've had a great run of guests recently, especially celebrating our 100th episode. We had Ian Rankin on and recorded that one on YouTube, so you can watch that as a video interview on YouTube. Last week we had
mugs. You can
that's the downside of watching it, of course. Last week we had the brilliant Georgia Pritchett, who wrote Succession and Thick of It and Veep and stuff. So there's a whole host of different types of writers that we've had on the podcast. So please do check out the previous episodes. But we have a great guest this week as well.
Yes, indeed. We're jumping back into the worlds of books this episode with James Oswald, who has seen massive success with his Inspector Maclean series of books, kind of crime with a supernatural twist.
Yeah, and he tells us about how at first there was a real struggle to publish these to the extent that he actually self-published them, but he had huge success with self-publishing, and then suddenly the publishers came back knocking at his door to try and publish
isn't
him.
It's the kind of underdog showing the big boys that they're actually written something of value, but they just didn't realise it first.
They'd previously dismissed it. So it's really interesting talking about that whole process and how he did the self-publishing and why he is now happy being traditionally published, and the sort of pros and cons of each approach. We discuss that in a lot of depth. We also chat a bit about comics, because his first actually published written thing was a Future Shock comic strip for 2000 AD. And he's kept that love of comics throughout, and he chats to us about whether he'd like to write another comic in the future. So there's a lot in the episode, a lot of advice, and James is a lovely guy. So we'll get straight into it after a quick advert for our writer's notebook. But before we do that, even, I just want to remind you that this is the last week in which you can enter our competition. You can find the details on our social media for a whole host of books from previous guests and a signed book from Ian Rankin, along with a signed Page One notebook as well.
A prize.
Exactly.
Incredible.
So all the details of that are on our social media, as I say, or if you check back on the Ian Rankin episode, the instructions on how to enter are in the podcast description for that episode. The competition is open until Wednesday, the 30th of March, and the winner will be announced next episode. So not long to go, but if you fancy some free books and a free signed notebook, then do enter, I suppose. But we'll get on to the podcast, and we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy, and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page 1.
Did you always want to be a writer? Because in preparing for this interview, I was reading about your background, and obviously you came to writing quite late on.
Well, I didn't come to writing quite late on. I came to being published quite late on.
Yeah, sorry. That's what I meant. Yeah.
I mean, did I always want to be a writer? I certainly always loved writing from a very early age, making up silly stories and all that sort of stuff. I didn't really think about writing, for a wider audience until I was at university, and the sort of last couple of years at university, trying to think what I might like to do. And I was heavily into comics at the time. I mean, I've been into comics since I was in short trousers, but I was really getting into a lot of the American comics then. This had been the late 80s. And I remember going to, must be about 1990, 1901 or something, going to a talk at the Central Library in Aberdeen. I was at Aberdeen University. With Grant Morrison and Mark Miller turned up and gave a talk about their work that they were doing in 2000 AD at the time. And one of the questions at the end was, how do you get into writing comics? And Mark said, you write some scripts and send them in. So I thought, I can try doing that. And that was kind of so I guess that would have been when I first started wanting to be a writer. It sort of, it hadn't really occurred to me that the stories that I wrote might have any greater audience than myself until then.
And how long did you spend from that point? Because the two novels that you first put out were your first two books in your Inspector Maclean series, which you put out yourself, self-pubbed them.
Yeah.
But up until that point, had you been writing stuff? Had you been trying to write novels?
My first published piece of writing that I got paid money for was A Tharg's Future Shock in 2000 AD in December 1993. Yeah. So and then I didn't get anything else published until basically until Natural Causes, which I self-published in 2012. There was a short story originally, Natural Causes, that I then expanded into a novel, and the short story was published in a Canadian sort of fan magazine in late 2006. So yeah, I've been writing all of that time, but just not managing to get published.
Well, I was going to ask about that. I mean, did you obviously were writing stuff, and were you on the search? Were you doing the usual path of sending stuff to agents and all of that sort of stuff? And
I did. I mean, obviously,
headway.
Yeah, it started with the comics, and I was kind of focused on 2000 AD because that's what I knew best. And I was constantly sending them scripts and constantly getting them sent back saying, we're not buying anything at the moment. They never said this is rubbish or you need to go away and work on your characterization or something. It was always, we're just not buying anything at the moment. And I kind of then sort of moved sideways into writing prose fiction, and that kind of kicked off my first novel, which was a not terribly good science fiction novel, which I wrote in about 1997, something like that. In the early 2000s, I moved down to Wales with work, and inspired by the countryside that I was living in the middle of Wales, in the countryside outside Aberystwyth, up in the mountains, and learning the language, and that inspired me to try writing a fantasy series, which has subsequently been published. But that's what I first started writing, and sending out on submissions. And I did get an agent based on those, but she didn't manage to find a publisher for them. And then she retired from the industry, so I was left stranded for a while.
Oh no! Back to square one at that point.
Yeah.
So at this point, you've been working on your fantasy novels. You've had an agent who's then who's not been able to sell them, and it's now left. Was at that point you thought, I'm going to shelve the fantasy novel, I'm going to try my hand at doing this? Obviously, you've written the short story. Did you have that in your mind? You're thinking maybe there's something here I could grow?
Well, the key to my switching from fantasy to crime fiction was a certain crime fiction novelist you may have heard of called Stuart McBride. I met Stuart in Aberdeen in the early 90s. He's a great artist, and we were introduced. He wanted to draw comics as well as writing,
right. Okay.
And we were introduced by a mutual friend. And there was a comics, manga, sci-fi fanzine in Aberdeen then called From the Sublime, and we both contributed to it. And then we collaborated on a couple of stories that never really got terribly far. Then I moved out of Aberdeen. Stuart stayed there, but we kept in touch, and we used to send each other our manuscripts for critiquing and everything. And then when he got his breakthrough, and HarperCollins picked him up with Cold Granite, his first Logan McRae book, he phoned me up and said, I've got a publishing deal. This is brilliant and everything. And in part of that conversation, he said to me that I should give up with this nonsense with fantasy, with dragons and sheep and stuff, and write crime fiction, because that's where things were. And I took him to heart. And I'd never written any crime fiction before then. I'd read a bit. I'd read some of Ian Rankin's books because my dad was a big fan of them. And I went through an Agatha Christie phase when I was a teenager. And so I just thought, well, I don't really know what to do. But I had a character, Tony Maclean, from a comic script that I'd written on spec for 2000 AD years before. And I thought, well, I'll give that a go. I'll try and find out a bit more about this character. And that's where the short stories came in. I sat down and wrote half a dozen short stories to try and work out who he was. And then one of them was Natural Causes, which I then expanded into a full-length novel. But that was 2006, I think I wrote that as the novel. And I couldn't get it published. I still had my agent at that point, and Natural Causes got shortlisted for the CWA debut Dagger. Yep. On the basis of that, the back of that, publishers really wanted to see it. So my agent got very excited and was sending it out to loads of people. And then I kept getting these rave rejections, as I call them. All the publishers said that they were all coming back saying, the writing's really good. We really love the story and the characters and stuff, but we just can't sell a police procedural with supernatural overtones in it. The ghosts and the ghouls and stuff. People won't buy crime books that have that. And that was, so it kind of, I kind of stalled at that point. And not helped by the fact that there's 2008, when I'd written the second book in the series. It had been shortlisted for the debut Dagger again. Publishers had liked it and rejected it. And then I was just kind of trying to think out what I'm going to do next. And my mum and dad were killed in a car accident. So that kind of knocked the wind out of my sails for a couple of years. And that's why I ended up moving back from Wales up to Scotland to take on the family farm, which is what I do now. But I didn't write anything for about 2 or 3 years. That was kind of my grieving process. Yeah. And that's when I then decided to self-publish Natural Causes and the Book of Souls, just to kind of keep my hand in, as it were.
And making that decision to self-publish, did you go in, did you do research on what you need to do to self-publish and get a cover designed and all this sort of stuff? Did you build up an email list? What steps did you go through to do that?
I didn't do much in the way of marketing, but I did a lot of research into how to create an ebook. It helped that when I was in Wales, I spent a lot of time working as a website developer and stuff. So I was kind of quite technologically savvy. Technologically savvy? I don't know. Anyway, I knew how to do it. And I did a little bit of research into the best ways to go about loading stuff up to this was 2011. It was quite early in the Kindle years. And one of the things that I picked up from another author was the idea of giving away a book, the first book in a series, in the hope that people would then buy subsequent books in the series. Yeah. And so that was my only marketing strategy, really. I did commission someone to do some covers for me. That was the only thing I having looked at self-published books, and the one thing that was really noticeable was just how bad most of the covers were. Done by a teenage nephew with crayons or something. And I thought it's the first thing that people see. So, and I was lucky because at that point, I knew quite a lot of people in publishing, one of whom was Al Guthrie, who's quite a good crime writer himself, but he's also an agent. And he had self-published some of his short stories and novellas, and had used an American-based cover artist called J.T. Lindroos, introduced me to him. J.T. came up with some brilliant cover ideas for my books. We went with them, and it just gave them that little extra edge.
I mean, and they, because they went on then to find incredible success. You know, they've I think, am I right in saying to date they've sold well over 350,000 of them? I mean, just a really huge impact. This is the bizarre thing. I put out Natural Causes, the first book, almost exactly 10 years ago. It was February 2012, and to start with, I was charging money for it. It was like £1.99 or something, and I was selling, 5 or 6 copies a week, which I thought that was pretty good for some. No one had ever heard of me. I was happy with that. But the plan had always been to make it free. But back then you couldn't set a price of 0 on the Kindle. It was Amazon's system. I think it's still the same now. You can't actually sell your book for nothing on the Kindle except for a short term and only if you're Amazon exclusive. But what you can do, and it's against all the terms and conditions, so you get kicked off if you do it, if you're not careful, you can make it available free somewhere else and then get Amazon to price match it. And this is what everyone was doing 10 years ago. But it took 2 or 3 months for Natural Causes to go from £1.99 to nothing. And as I say, it was selling 5 or 6 copies a week, and then it went to 0. I wasn't even watching when it went to 0 because it took a while for Amazon to notice that it was free elsewhere, and it suddenly went to 2,000 copies a day, and it was, and I don't know why. It just caught somebody's attention, and it just snowballed. It was fascinating to see, and I did absolutely no marketing. I at the time I was on Twitter. I had maybe 300 followers on Twitter, so I can't lay it at their door or anything. It was just the right place, the right time, very good cover, and then of course I started getting really good reviews. People were reviewing it, so that fed into it as well. And I think I made the book's obviously good enough, but I think I was very lucky with my timing as well.
Yeah, but it also then showed that all these publishers that said there's no market for this type of book were entirely wrong. I mean, it's funny, we've spoken to other guests about that the publishing industry is so sort of monolithic in its thinking a lot of the time, with the exception of some smaller publishers maybe, but that they won't take risks on anything that isn't already done in a way, and yet they want new voices to appear.
They want new, but they don't want new.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I can kind of understand, because it's an expensive business. Taking on a new author, putting out a book. If you look at my books, any of my books now, the Inspector Maclean books, and read the blurb on the back of them, you won't find any mention of ghosts, ghouls, demons, jinn, whatever. There's maybe sinister undertones or dark goings on or evil roaming the streets, but and it's not that people don't like them. They sell very well, and people keep on asking for more, and they really do like that stuff. But if you put on the blurb that it seems to be a police procedural, it's in the crime section, but you've got mention of ghosts and supernatural stuff, people will put it straight back down again and go pick up something which is just straight crime fiction. So publishing is small c conservative that way, but they kind of have to be, because otherwise they produce a lovely book, costs a lot of money, they put a lot of marketing behind it, and nobody buys it.
So do you think it's almost like not just the publishers but the public themselves have these kind of set areas that they will go into and areas that they won't go into, unless you kind of almost trick them, or you pull them into an area where they weren't suspecting it was going to go that way, and they realise, I actually quite enjoy this stuff, which I would would never thought I would have, but I actually do. But you almost need to do it by, surprise.
Stealth, yeah.
By
Stealth, yeah.
I think very much so. I mean, people, when you talk to people and they say stupid, to me seems like really stupid things like, I don't read books written by women. A lot of them I know say that, and it's like, why not? That's you're cutting yourself off.
And there's women we've chatted to women who have had to put books out with a letter as a first name, so that no one knows that they're female. And folks still read it, but it's like, so you do read books by women, you just don't realize it. Yeah,
and it's sad that it is that way, but you just kind of have to adapt to it. And my books kind of trick people in a little bit, and that way. And I just introduce these undertones of supernatural goings on, because I like that kind of work anyway. I like that kind of story. But if I was to go out and sell them as that, it would put a lot of people off.
Mm-hmm. And obviously with the success that the self-publishing of these books had, that eventually attracted the attention of a traditional publisher in the form of Penguin. I mean, how did that come about, and did that feel? Did it feel like a sort of validation at that point, because you'd already generated this great success as a self-published author?
It was. Yeah, it's kind of that last thing, because I can remember, I'm old enough to remember when self-publishing was called vanity publishing, and it was very much frowned upon. And I'm glad that it's not anymore. I think I love the way Kindle has opened up publishing to anyone who really wants to have a go. But when Penguin came along, and actually there was a 5-way auction for the rights, and I got myself a new agent at that time as well, which was brilliant. And 2012 was a very busy year, but it just it was having big publishers like Penguin and Headline and actually offering me money for my work was the kind of validation I think that any author wants. Someone's taking you serious, someone who's a professional is taking you seriously, and it gives you a huge amount of confidence that before then I never really had. So. And the other thing, as I found, with the self-publishing, I didn't have the time to write the books and market the books properly, and trying to expand the market for them, and run a farm, which is my day job. So actually having Penguin come along and saying, we'll do all the marketing, all the publicity, we'll get the books into the bookshops, and we'll do all the cover design and all the editorial and stuff. And here's a very large check. It's a no-brainer, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask, what changed when Penguin came onto the scene? Obviously they would do the editing, the revisions, it would help you with that kind of stuff, and it sounds very much like that was a welcome change.
It was, yeah. As I say, I used to, back in the day, I used to exchange manuscripts with Stuart McBride, and we'd give each other feedback and stuff. And that was all the feedback I ever got on my work. So to suddenly have, one of the top editors at Penguin going over it and coming back with feedback. My agent's a very good editor in her own right as well, so she'd always read the novels and give them feedback. And the copy editors and proofreaders and getting all of this professional work going into the book is absolutely brilliant. I'd say I love it. I hate it at the time, but I love that the books are getting that attention, because each pass makes it better. So I'm really happy to be published. No disrespect to people who are entirely self-published. Mm-hmm. Most of the top ones all use, they use professional editors and pay them. And I think you always need that second and third pair of eyes on your work.
Mm-hmm. I think that's definitely true, and I think it's also important that second or third pair of eyes is independent in a way, or
a step away from.
Yeah, it's not your mum, but not even like your friends and stuff like that. I think getting someone that's cold to it can really open up a new perspective on things. And
that's another great thing.
I
interrupted. Another great thing about the explosion of self-publishing is there's been an explosion of really good independent freelance editors out there now as well. So it's a whole industry setting itself up. I've got quite a few friends who do that and are very good at it.
Yeah, definitely. And has your actual writing process changed at all from when you were being self-published to now? Do you work through your drafts more quickly? Do you do a first draft and send it in for notes, or is it pretty much the same as it always was?
I think the main thing is that everything is much quicker. I have to get. I've got deadlines, and I've somewhat madly. This book that came out just last week is my 20th published novel. The first one was published 9 years ago. So. Some years I had 3 books out, and whilst I had written a few of them in the past, I just seem to have been constantly writing. So the deadlines get worse and worse. I do like that in a way, because if I was given a deadline 2 years hence, I would do nothing for 15 months, and then write the rest in the last 9 months, like panicking, and I still do to a certain extent. I need to have a deadline. But my writing process, I'm not much of a planner. I don't really plot much. I've got a whiteboard and a notebook, and quite often I'll have a Word document for the project, whichever book it is, which is just almost a stream of consciousness thing. If I come up with an idea, I'll just type it in there, so it's always there available. And mostly I make it up as I go along. And I've always been happiest doing that. It does mean that my first drafts are a little bit ropey, and my first draft no one ever gets to see apart from me. Right. I'll read that through, look at all the notes I've taken whilst I've been writing it, make it readable, and then that goes to my agent and my editor. And so it's really only a second draft going to agent and editor, and then their notes. They have a long lunch. And combine their notes and come back, attack me from 2 directions at once, as it were. But actually, and then that'll be my major structural redraft. And at that point, it's off to the sort of copy editors and proofreaders, and that's pretty much nailed down the finished book, which is quite a quick process now.
Yeah, it sounds.
And of course, at the same time as writing, you've mentioned you're also a farmer based in Fife, not far from Edinburgh, I don't think, from where we're based. And that's a demanding job. At times of the year, you work in random hours. And how do you juggle farm and writing?
One of the best things I did as an author and a farmer was not having any children, so I don't have anything else to do but the farming and the writing. I have cut back. It's a livestock farm. I had 100 breeding ewes and about 30 odd breeding cows. I've got Highland cattle here. And originally, when I took over the farm after my dad died, I was going to build up numbers to much more than that. But because the books took off and frankly pay an awful lot better than farming, I have cut back the numbers. We had a new neighbour, moved into the farm next door about 5 years ago, and he was looking for some grazing so he could increase his sheep numbers. He came and asked if I'd got any spare grazing. And I said, I can rent you some grazing and I can sell you some sheep. So he took all my sheep. So I've now only got the cows, which are a lot easier to work with, a lot less work. What does suffer on the farm is I'm not so good at mending fences, and the recent storms, we lost a lot of trees down over, have come down over fences, and there's a lot of work to do there, which I'm going to have to pay somebody else to do because it just takes too much time. So all those little jobs like that don't get done. But there are times of year we'll be calving in May, and I'll be pretty full on then doing that. But that doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about what I'm writing at the time. If I'm in a field waiting for a cow to calve, I've got my notebook out and I could be scribbling down notes, or I could be thinking through how the next bit of the plot's going to work. So the two do kind of dovetail together quite well.
I can see that. And you mentioned obviously your 20th novel, All That Lives, just out. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's it's the 12th of the Inspector Maclean books. I have another crime series and the fantasy. There's 5 fantasy books. It starts off with the discovery of a skeletal remains in a pit, deep pit underneath where they're excavating for the tram extension down in the old Leith Kirkyard, which has actually happened. And there was a report in the news a couple of years back when they were doing the archaeological exploration before they concreted everything over for the tram lines. And they discovered lower down than the kirkyard, so beneath all the proper Christian graves, a pit with a woman's skeletal remains of a woman who appears to have just been like murdered and chucked in there or something. And I just thought, that's a brilliant idea for a crime fiction novel. I'm not really. They worked out the bones have been down there for about 750, 800 years, so it doesn't really work for a contemporary crime novel. And I wasn't about to write a historical crime, but I did think about it, and I thought, well, what if they found this body and the police aren't interested? It's ancient bones. It's not interesting at all. But then on the other side of the city, where they're doing some putting up new buildings, and they're digging a trench for the foundations, they discover another body, almost disposed of almost identically, but this one's only been in the ground for 30 years. And then suddenly it's, what the hell's going on here? And so that was kind of the spark for the story. And then I had to think of more of a crime, contemporary crime thing going on at the same time. So there's a new drug which has hit the streets that the police don't really know very much about, but people are overdosing on it and they're having violent, fatal seizures. And poor old Inspector Maclean, Tony Maclean, is trying to sort out that whilst everything else is going to hell in a handbasket as well, which is pretty much the plot to all of my books. To be said.
And I mean, it sounds like you get a lot of your ideas. Is it from anywhere? Is it you always just kind of keeping your mind open for a phrase or a news article or something?
I mean, the previous one, Bury Them Deep. What Will Burn, which is there was a lot of stuff in the news about, and there still is recently, about the persecution of witches in Scotland in the 16th and 17th century, and I thought, witches, that kind of fits in really well with my spooky undertones to my books anyway, and I wrote the book based on the idea of like modern day witches, and they're rather than the witch finder general and all that sort of stuff, you've got the men's rights activists who kind of take that role. So that was kind of the basis for that book, and that starts off with the horrific, brutal murder of an old lady in her home, who may or may not have been a witch. The book before that, Bury Them Deep, came about. The spark for that was 2 random Twitter conversations colliding. One, I was talking to someone about Scottish folk horror, and the legend of Sawney Bean came up, which is a wonderful story to use for my kind of book. But somebody else was going on about dogging in and around. I can't remember what it is. Where the police had to close off some car park. I think it's Braid Hills Golf Course or something like that, which was apparently a really popular dogging spot. And the two things collided, and I thought, you've got cannibals and you've got dogging. And literally, I will start a novel with that, with nothing more than that. And that's kind of how I like to do it, to just kind of take 2 completely random and absurd ideas and mash them together. And one of the things that really works, because I'm writing series fiction, so I've already got my main characters. I've got Tony Maclean and the policeman around him, and I've got a cast of supporting cast of 1 or 2 villains who keep on coming back, and so you just kind of, all I really need to do is find an interesting case for them to work on, and that's how I can write my first drafts. My first and second drafts can come out so quickly, because I've already got these characters. I don't have to spend a lot of time working out who they are.
Yes, I suppose that's right, and you don't have that sort of world building that you would have if it was a completely fresh set of characters and place and everything. But I wanted to ask about writing series fiction like that, because obviously each one needs to be accessible to someone that only picks up the latest book. But do you have a sort of idea of how you see Tony Maclean developing throughout these novels, or do you just take it a book at a time?
I just really take it a book at a time. I made the mistake when after the first 3 books had come out, because the first Penguin did a deal with me for 3 books, 2 of which I'd already written, and the third one was almost finished when I signed the contract. So very, very quickly did a second deal for 3 more books, which was brilliant, and I was really excited about that. And I thought, taking a cue from how I used to write comics, I could do 3 books with an arc working through all 3 books, and it didn't work at all, because these books are coming out a year apart, and people got annoyed with a plot point that was unresolved in the first book and didn't get resolved until the end of the third book. So I do now very much try to keep all of the books independent of each other, and you can pick up all that lives. If you haven't read any of the 11 before, you'll still get a really good read. I think. I might be a little biased here. Nothing will be. You won't not understand anything.
Yeah.
And think, well, I've missed this from a previous book.
Yeah.
If something does need to be known, then I will make it obvious. I will reference it in the text. So and I try hard not to be too just explaining stuff, because it needs to come out naturally in the flow of the story. But I just try to keep things, each book independent, as it were. So that it's a series. You've got the same characters coming along each time, and obviously they get older. They get injured in one book, so that injury will be referenced in later books, and things like that. But I think if you tried to plan for novels, if you tried to plan a series from start to finish, with crucial points that mean you have to read all of the books, for crime fiction, I don't think it works. It works obviously for fantasy. My fantasy series is a 5-book series, and if you pick up book 3 without having read books 1 and 2, you won't have a clue what's going on. But the whole thing, that was all planned as and fantasy tends to go that way.
It's a sort of reader expectation thing as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think fantasy or sci-fi readers or something will understand that if it's the second book in a series, they'll need to pick up all of them. But yeah, crime fiction is more. The expectation is that you can just go and pick up any book and enjoy that on its own. And I wanted to ask about the fantasy novels, because obviously you said you wrote some of those prior to being published. Do you enjoy jumping between these different worlds?
I do. It was really useful that because I'd written the first 3 books in the fantasy series. I wrote the first 2 before I wrote any of the Tony Maclean books, and then I wrote the third one. And when I got to the end of the third one and realised I hadn't got a publisher for them, I just parked them, because I didn't really want to spend another 2 years writing the rest of them and never find a publisher for them. But my editor, who'd bought the Tony Maclean books, asked me at one time when we had a meeting. He said, had I written anything else? I said, well, there's this fantasy series that I'd love to finish sometime. And he said, oh, I'd love to read that. I thought he was just humouring me, so I didn't do anything about it. And he pestered me for it. And I sent him the 3 books. It was over Easter weekend of 2013 or something. And he read them all all 3 of them over the weekend, and came back with a very generous offer to publish them, which was brilliant. I was absolutely stoked. But then I had to think, well, how the hell was I going to finish this series? Because it was about 10 years had passed from parking book 3 to starting to write book 4. But I just kind of knuckled down and did it. But it meant that I could write a Tony Maclean book, and then I could write a fantasy book. Yeah. And then I could write a Tony Maclean book, because I'd done 3 Tony Maclean books in a row, and my head was just kind of exploding. I was just kind of getting the characters confused and stuff. So it's really nice to have something else to do, to be able to chop and change. I'd hate to just be writing one character over and over again, producing a book a year.
Is it hard to... Oh, sorry. I was going to ask, is it hard to jump between... writing crime and fantasy? Trying to get in the headspace for each, because it must be very, very different. But is it obviously, and you enjoy that jumping back and forth? But is it hard?
I didn't find it hard. I haven't done any fantasy for a while now. I've got my second crime fiction series, which is kind of interlinked with Tony Maclean's world, but not completely. So I've been switching between the two of those, but I didn't actually find it hard at all to switch between the two. I do read a lot of fantasy still. That's one of the great things about being a published author is you get sent loads of other people's books to read and write nice things about, but it's always crime fiction, because I'm known for crime fiction. So I very, very rarely get sent any fantasy at all, and so all the crime fiction books that I get sent to read, and most of them are really good, but it feels like homework. It feels like the set text at school. Whereas if I'm reading a fantasy novel, it's something that I've picked up for myself. So I tend to read fantasy to refresh myself now. I do really want to write some more. I just need to find the time.
And I was going to ask as well, because obviously, as you mentioned, you started way back when writing a strip for 2000 AD. I mean, would you still be interested in writing a comic or a graphic novel or something like that?
I would very much love to write more comics, and I have actually had conversations with comics publishers, but nothing concrete yet. But that would probably be, I don't think necessarily crime fiction comics, because that's quite a niche market. I'd love to go full on superhero. I think that'd be great fun.
But then you have to catch up with all the continuity of the...
Well, I don't know. It depends whether you... I mean, if I was to say, if someone was to offer me a chance to do a run on Superman or something, I'd be completely scuppered, because I haven't read Superman for years. I'd probably make it with the X-Men, because I still do read comics. I think doing something standalone, completely sort of from fresh will be quite fun. Mostly it's a time thing, because I've been producing a Tony Maclean book novel every year for the last 8-9 years, and other books in between, and that does, that and the farming takes up most of my time. This is why I keep on getting people saying, when's there going to be another dragon book? And I say, well, when I can find some time, or clone myself.
And we've seen a lot of people not a lot of people, but a number of people, especially high-profile authors. John Grisham comes to mind, who kind of went back to the self-pub world, or tried the self-pub world for themselves for the first time, and dipped their toe in it at least. And is that something you'd be interested in going back to, and putting something out yourself and having more control over it, or are you happy just to stay completely with the
Well, funnily enough, my books haven't done brilliantly well in the States. And the first 3 were bought and published, and the first one did really well. And I got invited on to the Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson back in 2014, which was brilliant. And slightly bizarre. But they didn't really follow up with the marketing on that, and the books didn't do terribly well. So I couldn't get a publisher for the later ones. And they haven't been interested in my fantasy books at all. So I do have a readership out there, and so rather than having to buy them from the UK or pirate them, I self-publish all of my titles in the US. So I'm still doing that, and I'm still using JT Lindrews to do the covers for me. But the idea of maybe doing a self-published book in the UK, or doing the whole thing from scratch. I don't know why I would do it, because if I wrote a novel and no publisher was interested in it, then maybe I'd put it out there. But otherwise, I'm in the fortunate position. I'm a well enough known author that there's likely to be some publisher there who'll do it for me. And as I say, okay, I don't have quite so much control over it, and they're taking a big chunk of the money from the book sales and stuff. But they're also doing all of the marketing and all the back office editorial stuff and all the things which I just don't have time to do. And it was great fun back in 2012, and when I first started doing the self-publishing, it was really interesting, but it was very hard work, and it's a question of juggling and working out what's the best use of my time now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. It becomes another job almost if you're self-publishing your own book, because there's the writing, but then you have to concentrate on that as well.
I wouldn't want to put anyone off trying self-publishing if they want to have a go. It's so much easier now than it used to be. It's not sneered at in quite the same way as it used to be back in the old vanity publishing days. And if you burn with a passion to write and you want to get your stories out there, and you can't find an agent or a publisher to take you on, absolutely do it for yourself. Go and do it for yourself, but don't do it because you want to become rich and famous. Do it because you love telling stories.
So what's coming up next then? What's next on the agenda?
I'm currently in negotiations with my publisher because All That Lives was the last one in my current contract. So once that's settled, I shall be casting my mind on what's going to happen to Tony Maclean next. I don't want to give away too many spoilers because not many people have read the book yet, but something fairly momentous happens at the end of it, which got me an awful lot of people emailing in. So is this the last one in the series?
Okay.
It's not. There will be more, and that's what I'm going to work on that, and also try and sort out a few comic scripts as well.
What was the last book that you read?
The last book that I read is called. This is where you put me on the spot because I can never remember book titles.
I know. I should always tell people because all our guests have this problem.
Again, it was a proof copy, and it's called Still Life. I think about Ali Turner. It's the second in her Cassie Raven series. Cassie Raven is a mortuary assistant in Camden, lives in Camden in London, and she's just this brilliant character. I absolutely loved the book. The first book was superb as well, and she has this thing. We're never quite sure whether it actually is a kind of supernatural ability, but every so often when she's tending to the dead bodies in the mortuary, getting them ready for post-mortem and stuff, sometimes she feels like they're speaking to her. Like they just say a simple sentence like, I didn't die easily, or something like that. And she, being a naturally nosy person, then has to go and find out what truly killed this person. And I've those two books in the series so far, and they're absolutely brilliant. So that was the last book I read. Yeah.
Nice. And what about the last film that you watched?
Last film that I watched. Oh God, you're really putting me on the spot there. I don't watch a lot of telly, so I don't watch films on the telly. The last film that I went to the cinema to see, given that we've been in a pandemic for the last couple of years, I went and saw Marvel's Eternals. That's what I saw.
Okay. What's your thoughts on that?
Because I was in London for the launch of my previous book back in November, I think it was, and I had an evening to myself, and I didn't know what to do, and so I went to the enormous IMAX in Leicester Square.
Yeah.
And there was about me and about 5 other people in there, so it was great. No problems with COVID or anything.
Yeah.
And on the big screen, on the IMAX, biggest IMAX theatre I've ever been in, it was really good. It was half an hour too long, but it was really enjoyable. And I think that's I think most people have said that's a problem with that film. It's just a little bit too long.
I felt there was a really good film in there somewhere, and there was parts of it I really, really liked, and it kind of clicked together. But there was parts of it. It felt a lot of exposition-y and a lot of explaining stuff quite clunkily, and it didn't. I remember it ended, and I was quite annoyed because I was like, I feel like there's a really good. I know I've read some of the comics and they're really good characters and stuff, and I love the idea of these gods living through history. But yeah, it didn't quite work for me, which I was a bit annoyed at.
think it could have made a really good 12-part series.
Yeah, in fact, there's so much story there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. A TV show would have been a nicer way to do it, I think. Almost.
It also suffers from something, and this happens in the comics as well, but that, you know, there's a giant thing emerging from the ocean, and none of the Avengers or anything turn up to try and see what's happening. So there's almost too many characters for them to deal with now. But I'll always go and watch these films.
I love all this because I grew up reading comics. Comics are my thing. I love this new age of comics movies. I mean, some of them are really, really bad, but they're great fun. It's nice to see kind of my geekdom taking over the world.
I'm very much on board with it. I'm very much looking forward to the new Batman film. So
yes,
absolutely.
Well, that's kind of the very, very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or, and I always say there's no right answers apart from one. So we'll start off with crime or fantasy.
Fantasy.
US or UK comics?
UK comics.
TV or cinema? Oh, sorry.
Could I? UK comics.
You can expand,
I think probably circa 1985 to 1995.
Yeah.
Fair enough. TV or cinema?
Cinema.
Night owl or early bird?
Night owl, definitely. For a farmer, I'm rubbish at getting up in the morning.
And the last one, real book or ebook?
I prefer a real book, but ebooks are really, really useful when I'm traveling. Not that I traveled much in the last couple of years, but I like paper. Actually, if I turned my camera around, you'd see this room is just stacked with bookshelves. So.
Excellent. Well, that's the majority. Yeah.
Everyone always
looking
picks
for
real
ebooks.
book. Everyone always picks real book. It's a dying breed over here in the ebook camp.
But I mean, given that the Kindle, my career is basically based on, Amazon Kindle kickstarted my career, so I can't diss ebooks too much, but I do like to be able to pick something up.
So, have you seen the new Batman? We just mentioned it there with James. Yeah,
I have indeed seen the new Batman. I thought it was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I have to say myself as well. It is obviously a long film, but
yeah, I thought it was a tad over long. And without going into spoilers, obviously, I thought the kind of like pretty much every superhero film feels it has to do had a really big kind of bombastic ending, and I almost would have preferred a smaller, more introspective ending to it.
Although
it was quite a quiet film a lot of the way through.
I think that's right. I did like the more detective side of it, and
I loved that stuff.
I suppose the difference from other superhero films with that ending, without any spoilers, is that it doesn't just go into that sort of big Marvel CGI bash fest.
No, it's definitely no, that's true.
So
it's definitely not a case of just for the sake of it. There is definitely a point to the big ending.
So anyway, we're talking about the Batman there, and
it's just, I have to say before we go, it's great to see the film version of Batman finally leaning into the detective angle that the comics are always do so well, and the film versions have never really done any kind of justice for. So it was great, and him working the case with Gordon was just
I thought the cast was superb, and
stuff.
The interaction between the characters was superb, and I liked also just not just leaning into the detective side of things, but also the leaning into the comic side of things in a way with there's a narration, a sort of voiceover that he gives at the start, and it's very much like the comics. You always see a bit into the head of Batman when you're reading the comics,
and a different take on Bruce Wayne. Even it was. Then the kind of playboy. We're going to go. It's a good job.
I know. We'll do a separate Batman podcast at another time. But thanks very much to James for coming on to the podcast. Really appreciate him taking the time to do that. All That Lives is out, and you can get it at your local bookshop or online. We'll put a link in the podcast description. So thanks again to James for taking the time to come on. And next week we've got another great guest in the form of Fonda Lee.
Fonda Lee, she was a fantastic guest. She's written the awesome Jade City series of
Yeah,
fantasy
the
books,
Green Bone
which I know
Saga,
you're a
as they're
massive
called.
fan
Yeah,
of.
they're really brilliant. Sort of, they're fantasy books, but not in any sort of way that I've ever read fantasy before. It's more like a sort of mob movie with some hints of magic in it. They really are great books. So it was really fun chatting to Fonda, so please do tune in for that episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do take the time to give us a rating and review on your favourite podcast app.
And of course, if anyone has any questions or comments, they can always get in touch by sending us a tweet in the Twitter machine to @UKPage1 is our new Twitter
That's
handle.
correct.
So
I forgot to mention
this will
that.
probably solve the problem. It'll be much easier
Yeah.
now. I'm sure the floodgates will
Yeah,
be fine.
exactly.
Or they can get in touch by email, which is podcast@rightgear.com.
Yeah.
Podcast@rightgear.com.
No,
was the first time.
rightgear.co.uk. So close, Tarek.
Podcast@rightgear.co.uk.
Yeah, there you go.
That is the email address.
But otherwise, have a great week, and we'll see you next episode.
See you later.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode like these ones down here.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so by finding us on our social media platforms up here, or drop us a comment way down below there.
But otherwise, thanks for listening and join us for the next episode.
See you later.